Great. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Last day of the conference morning session. I do, before getting started, want to thank my supervisor as well as my supervisory committee, one of which is Roger. So double thanks for Roger, also because you are an organizer as well, and thanks to the other organizers. As well, thank you to my funders. So thanks to NSERC, to the university, and to the support from my lab, the Conservation Solutions Lab here at the university. So just to give a bit of a background before really jumping into this, the term threat can be used interchangeably with stressor or pressure. However, these differ from impacts, because impacts are the actual consequences exerted on the system from these threats or pressures. So what we have in front of us today, this is a picture of the global human footprint from Venter et al.'s 2016 paper. This is looking at a 2009 footprint. So the blue areas, those are areas that are least impacted, so more of those wild areas. And then going into that red, they have a scale that goes up to 50. Those are the areas that are the most human-dominated. So threats to biodiversity are actual actions taken by humans that harm natural systems. So by showing these pressures, we have an idea of where these threats are overlapping. So it's a really incredible and exciting tool that we can use, because you can show more than one threat. You can make it specific to species of study. You can also look at different extent, temporally, spatially. It's really diverse, and there's so many possibilities, which is why this is a really incredible tool. So for this presentation, I'll just be giving you a brief outline. We'll look a bit at the research aims of my specific project, methodology covered, and then if there's more questions on that, because it's only a 15-minute talk, please ask away. Some of my preliminary results and analyses. So for the research aims, I really wanted to look at using spatial analysis to determine where are those threats on the system. So Canada has agreed to or set targets to protect 17% of terrestrial land in Canada, and it's already underway, but we don't have a human footprint map of Canada. We don't know where these threats are actually overlapping. So for conservation, it would make sense that we have some sort of information there. So there are a number of footprint maps in existence for different countries. The States has 4 different ones looking at different threats. Mexico has one. The whole continent of South America has one. There's so many around the world. And we do have some in Canada looking at specific regions, but we don't have a national scale one. So that's really what this project is about. So in order to do this, the biggest step, and I think this was mentioned in a few other talks, finding the data. And so there's so many things that I really wanted to include, but just being able to find Canada-wide data without piecemealing from province to province that uses different methods of collection and scales and resolution did prove a little hard. So the 12 that I have listed there are 4 that are bolded. So the first 8 are the ones that are found in the global human footprint. So those ones there, when we looked at that global map, Canada looks very wild. It's all blue. You know, you might see like, oh, there's Toronto. There's Calgary, like a few little areas and blips here and there, but for the most part, it looks very wild. So these threats that are bolded are some that I thought would be a bit more important to Canada, because natural resources are a huge part of our economy, and we didn't have that there on any of the previous global ones. So I found dams and reservoirs, mining, oil and gas, and a forestry layer that I could use. So after collecting all of those, and then scaling them and making sure they're all used the same way, same resolution, all of those different things. Then you provide a different weight to them or a scoring system. So putting them on a 0 to 10 scale. So for example, built environments. What can be there nature-wise? Not much. So that has a score of 10. Whereas something like pasture lands, there's still grass at least. You do still have some issues with soil compaction. You do still have some fences. So that one does have a score of 4. But just to give you an idea of that kind of range, and as I said, I have a lot more details on that if people want to know. And then from there, what we do, we just overlay it. And at this point, because we're in a room of people who would probably know what I'm talking about, it's all rasterized, and then we can just simply do a raster calculator, add those layers together, and then you get your map. So bringing that in, what I'll show you next is the actual map. So this is the human footprint map of Canada, and I'm showing this similar to the global one. So I use the same scheme for colors. So those areas that are most wild are in blue, and then those areas that are most human dominated or under the highest anthropogenic threat are in red. And so we can see a few things here, but it doesn't really give us a great idea. So just for visualization, I did zoom in to the Prince George and other area, so we can really get an idea of how this scoring system and weighting system works. So we can see Prince George right in the center here. Okay, so that big red dot in the center, that's Prince George, and we can see the 16 and the 97 passing by, which is really nice. And you can see that these main highways have a wider area of influence than these smaller roads here. So that's something as we go over, we see Van de Hoof in the top left corner there. And then we have quite a bit of pixelation here, and there are actually 2 different toned pixelations. And what those are forestry cut blocks. So that was collected through remotely sensed data, and I used a data set there. And we actually differentiated between a recent cut and a free to grow state, which we used at about 12 to 13 years, as those offer very different things to biodiversity. So clear cut versus, okay, now the trees are a little high enough to give me a bit of cover, and things like that. So those are just a few examples of the different layers that you can see, so you have a better idea of that. And what we really did we did a bit of analysis to find a way to visualize it a bit better. And so with that, we looked at the state of the system. So using the COSOIC, so the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, using their national ecological areas. So there are 8 areas, and each of which is associated with a pie chart. And those circles are proportional to the area it covers in Canada. Then we looked at the state of the system. So anything that was considered wild, and the term wild, I'm using little air quotes here, that is in the context of Sanderson et al.'s 2002 paper that was The Human Footprint and the Last of the Wild. So that's the same kind of definition I'm using here. So anything that had a value of under 1 was considered wild. Anything that had a value of 1 till 4, not including 4, was considered intact. And the reason for 4 is because once you have a pasture land and you have some sort of fence or something blocking, it isn't intact anymore. And then we have our moderate in that orange, and that is going up to 10, and then anything over 10 has a value, or has that high human footprint value. So now we can kind of see Canada and what is really there. So the Great Lakes Plain area, the southernmost tip, that one doesn't look that great. And there's actually 0% that is wild in that area. 84% is under high human modification, 15% is under moderate, and we have 1% that's intact. And then you can look at the Arctic. It's the second largest area in Canada. That one is 99% wild. However, and I stress this, these are only showing the threats that are included in this study. There's still so many other things that are out there that I wish I could have included, but there might not have been the data set available that wouldn't introduce bias because of picking and choosing and piecemealing things together. So that's really something that I do want to stress. So from here, what we wanted to do is look at the individual threats. So here's a table, and it highlighted a couple lines, or the lines with the wording in black are those lines I'll be talking a bit about. So I wanted to compare how are we doing compared to the global analysis. So the first column, we have our different anthropogenic threats, and then the second set of columns has Canada, the third set has Canada global. So what I did, the Canada is the analysis that I did for the human footprint that I created. The Canada global one is what I did. I grabbed Venter Tal's latest, so that was the 2009 human footprint, and I clipped it to Canada, and then I ran the analyses to see what are we doing. Let's compare the two. What are we doing better with these national or having regional data sets is really powerful, and we can really see this through croplands. Looking at the different areas, we have 6 times more croplands showing up with our national data set. Pasture lands, we have a significant amount. Roads, I was using the National Road Network of 2016. So many more roads, because the global one, they can only show major roads, because globally there's no way you can capture everything. So this really shows the power of regional data sets. Nighttime lights actually went down, and that's just because of advancements in satellite imagery. And so we actually had a better satellite, so it actually reduces the issues of saturation and spillage. So then we actually had a smaller human footprint showing up for that. So when we look at the actual terrestrial land in Canada, there's over 9 million kilometers or square kilometers. So when we look at our total for what we found, it's over 3 million square kilometers. It doesn't seem like much, and also a lot of those are overlapping. But as I said, it's only what we're including here. There's still so many other things. And as part of this, we wanted to run a validation. So a lot of human footprint mapping projects, they'll throw the data sets in, they'll do their evaluation and go, okay, this is what's happening on the landscape. But we really wanted to see, are we overestimating this human footprint map? What are we doing? So I luckily had funding to hire an undergraduate student who was very meticulous and evaluated 5,000 random plots across Canada. So that's the area, the map on the right there. It looks like it has chicken pox, and she went to each individual one and looked and scored them and went, okay, what can we actually see visually here? So looking at high resolution imagery, what can we see? How can we compare this? And so with this, and this is the stage that I'm at, I haven't completed the validation yet. But the average image date was 2012, so we can get relatively new data or imagery there, and it continues to update. And so I want to validate these individual layers and go, firstly, are we really meeting what the ground says? Are these data sets sufficient, or are we really missing things? So that we can actually see what data sets need improvement, what needs, or what's a solid data set. And then also, what's on the landscape that we don't have? And one of the biggest things, seismic lines. They are everywhere, and especially in the north, they're everywhere, but there is no data set for it. So all those areas that look very wild, it doesn't show that there are huge lines cutting through at different areas. So that's something that we really want to see. So that's what we're working on now. And so thank you for listening to me this fine morning in time, very early for the last day of the conference. So just to sum up, I really want to find where are these areas, or these most wild areas in Canada versus these most developed areas. There are some things that pop up on the map that you really didn't expect, which are really nice to see. This is the first human footprint map of Canada, which is a little surprising, but that's why it's really important to do. And you know, the possibilities are endless with this for conservation, for planning and management. So it's a really wonderful opportunity, and I'm so happy to be on this project. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions. Can you go back to your second map of Canada? I guess your final sort of map.
This guy.
So you got Buffalo there. That seems a very hard boundary. Can you talk about that?
This here?
Yeah.
That's a common question. So that one is actually a census subdivision. So for population density, the way I can obtain that is looking at the different census subdivisions across Canada. You have a population for that, and then you can calculate density based on area. And the calculation for population, it's the log of population, I'd have to double check, but it was taken from Venture et al.'s 2016 paper, and just with that calculation of population, it had a value of over 1. So that whole area ends up standing out quite a bit. So that's how that happened. It's a bit of a shame because then everyone just looks at that rather than the rest of it, but just because population has a value of
Yeah, it's basically Fort McMurray is part of the surrounding municipality, so the population of Fort McMurray gets spread to the entire Wood Buffalo. And that's why you end up, it causes all sorts of problems in Alberta.
I'm sure you know. Yeah, so it's same kind of thing there every time, and I always get that question. I'm like, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about how wild was defined in that paper that you know, and how you define it in this.
Yes, and that's one of the critiques of the word wild. So Sanderson et al.'s 2002 paper, so that was the human footprint and the loss of the wild. He did a global human footprint map at a 1 kilometer squared resolution, including the eight data layers there, excluding the 4 additional ones. And he defined wild as any area that had a value of under 1 was considered wild, or least an area with the least amount of human pressure. And that's just terminology that's been used in the field. Hence why I use the air quotes around it.
And just to follow up with your seismic lines thing, so you did include it because you don't have remote sensing data for it, is that?
So there isn't a national data set for seismic lines, so I couldn't include it. When we're actually doing the validation, so we'll zoom into a 1 kilometer squared plot and look and go like, oh, well, that's a seismic line. That's a seismic line. And through the 5,000 plots that I looked at, about 1% of them have seismic lines through them. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's significant. And a lot of times we have a little plot right there, and we see the seismic lines going right across on either side. And we're like, I wish our plot was just a little bit. And actually someone from our lab is looking at the effectiveness of protected areas and doing some sort of validation in that manner. But they're looking at the plot, and they're also looking at 5 kilometers out. What else is there? And I wish I had done something along those lines, because we would have captured a lot more. But then our method for validation would have been a lot more complicated.
Okay. Yeah, it's a big thing, seismic lines.
It is.
in certain areas.
Absolutely.
In Alberta, there are more trees being taken out by seismic lines than forestry.
Yeah,
So-
it's a really, yeah,
And it creates, broken up
fracking
habitats
and all
for a lot of
those.
people.
Thank you very much, Kristen.
If you're looking at the timing.
Yeah.